The history of the Americas in this long transformative century is not a simple heroic story of inevitable progress. It is a story of profound and often brutal contradictions, a story of grand ideals and terrible hypocrisies. It's the story of a nation founded on the radical self-evident principle that all men are created equal that built its immense wealth and power on the backs of millions of enslaved people. It's the story of glorious revolutions that won political freedom from a distant king but entrenched deep and lasting economic inequality at home. It's the story of manifest destiny and the trail of tears, of industrial marvels and industrial slaughter, of Gilded Age opulence and tenement squalor. It is a story of hope and betrayal, of freedom and oppression, often existing side by side, in the same moment, in the same land. These forces, these conflicts, these triumphs, and these unresolved tragedies have not disappeared into the mists of the past. They are woven into the very fabric of our world today. The borders on our maps, the persistent inequalities in our societies, the complex and often fraught relationship between the powerful United States and its southern neighbors, all are the living echoes of this tumultuous, violent, and creative past. History is not something that is dead and buried, confined to dusty books. It is a living, breathing presence, a powerful river that flows through time and continues to shape our lives, our politics, and our identities in ways we may not even realize. Thank you for traveling back with me on this long journey tonight. Rest now. And perhaps as you drift off to sleep, you'll carry with you the faint, distant echo of a revolutionary's cry for liberty, the lonely rumble of a covered wagon on a prairie trail, or the quiet, unbreakable determination in the eyes of someone dreaming, against all odds, of a better, freer, and more just world. The moment they dropped anchor. Imagine standing on a muddy street in San Francisco in 1849. The air is a cacophony of dozens of different languages. The streets are a sea of unwashed, bearded men, all armed, all with a feverish, desperate look in their eyes. A simple meal of eggs and bacon costs a fortune. There is no law, no sanitation, and no government to speak of. Life in the actual mining camps in the mountains was even more brutal. Men lived in crude tents or shacks, stood all day in freezing river water sifting for gold, and died in droves from disease, accidents, and violence. Very, very few ever struck it rich. But the gold rush massively accelerated California's development, its population growth, and its inevitable path to statehood. And that raised the single most dangerous and explosive question in American politics. Would California, this golden prize, enter the Union as a free state, as its residents desired, or as a slave state, as the South demanded? The delicate, precarious balance of power between North and South, a balance that had held the fragile Union together for decades, was about to be shattered for good, pushing the divided nation one giant, fateful step closer to the abyss of civil war. And so we close our eyes again, not in the smoky, uncertain darkness of 1789, but in the flickering, electric light of a new dawning century. The journey we've taken across these 150 years has been immense, chaotic, and transformative. We have walked with idealistic revolutionaries and desperate slaves, with hardy pioneers and ruthless presidents, with young mill girls discovering their independence and robber barons accumulating unimaginable wealth. We have witnessed the violent birth of nearly 24 nations, the slow, agonizing death of a 300-year-old empire, and the agonizing, bloody creation of the modern world in the Americas.
The very heart of your nation.
It is a moment of profound, soul-crushing national humiliation. In the resulting Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, a vanquished Mexico was forced to cede more than half of its national territory to the United States. This vast expanse of land, the Mexican Cession, would become the future states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. In exchange, the United States paid Mexico a paltry $15 million, a sum that many Americans, including Ulysses S. Grant, who fought in the war as a young officer, considered to be conscience money for a war of unjust aggression. "We have taken half their country," an American diplomat remarked with a degree of awe after the treaty was signed. His more cynical colleague replied coldly, "They should be grateful we didn't take all of it." There were many in Washington who argued we should have. Just 9 days before the treaty was officially signed, a completely unrelated event occurred in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California that would transform the newly acquired territory, and indeed the world, almost overnight. A carpenter and handyman named James Marshall, working at a sawmill owned by John Sutter, saw something glittering in the water of the mill race. He had found gold. The California gold rush was on. Within a year, 100,000 people, 49ers, from every corner of the globe had flooded into the previously sleepy and remote territory of California. They came from the eastern United States, from Mexico and Chile, from Britain and Australia, from France and Germany, and from as far away as China. San Francisco, which had been a tiny, insignificant village of a few hundred people, transformed almost instantly into a chaotic, violent, lawless, and wildly expensive boomtown. Its harbor filled with hundreds of abandoned ships, their crews, and even their captains, having deserted en masse to head for the gold fields. Into a disputed border region between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. When Mexican forces, seeing this as an invasion of their sovereign territory, inevitably attacked the American patrol, Polk had the pretext he had been looking for all along. He went before Congress and delivered a solemn, disingenuous address. American blood, he declared, his voice ringing with false piety, has been shed on American soil. A young, little-known, and deeply moral first-term congressman from the frontier state of Illinois named Abraham Lincoln was profoundly skeptical. He repeatedly stood up in Congress and demanded that President Polk show him the exact spot on a map where this American blood had been shed, suspecting correctly that it was actually on disputed, if not outright Mexican territory. But his principled objections were drowned out by a nationalistic, jingoistic war fever. The Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, was a one-sided and humiliating disaster for Mexico, a nation that was internally divided, poorly led, and financially bankrupt. American armies, better equipped and better led, invaded from multiple directions. One army conquered New Mexico and California, while another under General Taylor pushed deep into northern Mexico. A third, led by General Winfield Scott, landed at the port of Veracruz and marched inland, following the same path as Hernán Cortés 3 centuries earlier, to capture the capital, Mexico City itself. Imagine you are a resident of Mexico City in September of 1847. For weeks, you have listened to the distant, terrifying sound of American cannons bombarding the city's defenses. Now, the fighting is in the streets. You huddle in your home with your family as the sounds of musket fire and screaming echo outside. Finally, a terrible silence falls. You peer out your window and see them, the tall foreign soldiers in their blue uniforms, their strange flag with its stars and stripes now flying over the National Palace in the Zocalo. Houston looks out over the battlefield, which is littered with the bodies of hundreds of Mexican soldiers. Your government may not accept it, he replies grimly, but the facts on the ground, my friend, have changed. For nearly a decade, Texas remained an independent nation, the Lone Star Republic. But its ultimate goal, and the passionate dream of many expansionist Americans, was annexation by the United States. That dream was about to be realized by a new, powerful, and dangerously seductive phrase that was beginning to sweep across America, a phrase that would justify a war of conquest and redefine the very shape of the continent: manifest destiny. It was a powerful, intoxicating, and quasi-religious idea, the belief that the United States was divinely ordained, that it was its God-given destiny to expand its dominion and spread its institutions of democracy and liberty across the entire North American continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Of course, this noble, civilizing vision conveniently and completely ignored the fact that this continent was already inhabited by hundreds of thousands of Native Americans and Mexicans who might have different ideas about their own destiny. Manifest destiny was a righteous-sounding excuse for imperial expansion and naked territorial conquest. In 1845, President James K. Polk, a stern workaholic and fervent believer in manifest destiny, came to office with a clear and aggressive agenda. He swiftly moved to annex the Republic of Texas. Mexico, which had never officially recognized Texan independence and still considered it a rebellious province, immediately broke off diplomatic relations and considered this an act of war. Polk then deliberately provoked a conflict by sending American troops under General Zachary Taylor, which, after 1829, included the abolition of slavery. Thousands of Americans, mostly southern cotton planters and frontiersmen hungry for land, flooded in, led by land agents or impresarios, like Stephen F. Austin. They paid lip service to the requirements, but never truly assimilated. They remained Protestant, spoke English, maintained their American identity, and most problematically, they brought their slaves with them, cynically reclassifying them as indentured servants for life to get around the Mexican ban. By 1835, Anglo-American settlers and their slaves in Texas outnumbered Mexican Tejano by nearly 10-1. A violent cultural and political clash was not just possible, it was inevitable. When the dictator Santa Anna threw out Mexico's Federalist Constitution of 1824 and began to centralize power, the American Texans, along with many Tejano who also opposed his dictatorship, saw their chance. In 1836, they declared their independence. The resulting Texas Revolution is famous in American lore for the legendary Battle of the Alamo, a former Spanish mission in San Antonio where a small band of fewer than 200 Texan rebels, including famous frontiersmen like Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, was besieged and ultimately annihilated by Santa Anna's much larger army. But the brutal nature of the defeat, Santa Anna ordered all survivors to be executed, and the cry of "Remember the Alamo" became a powerful, vengeful rallying cry for the Texan cause. Just 6 weeks later, the Texan army, under the command of General Sam Houston, surprised a sleeping and overconfident Santa Anna and his army at the Battle of San Jacinto. The battle was a slaughter, lasting just 18 minutes, and Santa Anna himself was captured. In exchange for his life, he was forced to sign treaties recognizing the independence of Texas. Mexico will never willingly surrender Texas. This treaty is meaningless, a captured proud Mexican officer tells Sam Houston after the battle. That night, in the cramped, airless slave quarters, a young woman, Eli's granddaughter, gently applies a poultice of chewed herbs to his raw, wounded back. "Why don't we run, Grandpappy?" she whispers fiercely, her young face a mask of anger and grief. "Why don't we run north? To freedom?" Eli winces as the herbs sting his open wounds. "3 tried last month, child," he says, his voice low and heavy with a weariness that goes beyond physical exhaustion. They were caught by the patrol and their dogs after 2 days. 2 of them were hanged as an example. The other was sold down the river to the sugar plantations in Louisiana, away from his wife and children forever. Freedom is a long, long and dangerous way from Mississippi, child. A very long way. While the United States grappled with the profound and growing contradictions of liberty and slavery within its own borders, its ambitious neighbor, the young and unstable Republic of Mexico, was facing a looming crisis of its own. After winning its hard-fought independence from Spain, Mexico had cycled through a brief, disastrous empire, a federal republic, and a series of chaotic dictatorships under the charismatic but notoriously unreliable Antonio López de Santa Anna. But its biggest, most existential problem was its vast, sparsely populated, and difficult-to-govern northern territories, particularly a fertile and temperate region called Tejas, or Texas. The Mexican government, desperate to create a buffer zone against both raids by Comanche Indians and the expansionist ambitions of the United States, had made a fateful and ultimately catastrophic decision. It actively encouraged American settlers to immigrate to Texas, offering them vast tracts of land for next to nothing. The only conditions were that these settlers had to pledge allegiance to Mexico, convert to Roman Catholicism, and obey all Mexican laws. But this market revolution, this explosion of commerce and industry, did not touch all parts of the country equally. The South remained overwhelmingly agricultural, its economy and its entire social structure, its very way of life, increasingly, fanatically dependent on a single crop, cotton. And cotton, in the antebellum South, meant slavery. By 1840, the United States was producing 2/3 of the entire world's supply of cotton. It was the nation's #1 export, the engine of its economic growth, the fuel for the textile mills of both New England and Great Britain. The immense wealth generated by this white gold was built on the uncompensated, brutal labor of 4 million enslaved people. And this immense profitability created a fierce, unyielding, and increasingly aggressive political and intellectual defense of the institution. What had once been described by Southern leaders like Thomas Jefferson as a regrettable necessary evil, was now being hailed by a new generation of pro-slavery ideologues as a positive good, a benevolent, paternalistic system that was beneficial for both the enslaved and for the stability of a civilized society. The reality, of course, was a living hell. Dawn breaks, hot and humid, over a vast cotton plantation in the Mississippi Delta. The enslaved workers are already in the fields, the sun already beating down on their backs. An overseer on a large gray horse watches their every move, his long braided leather whip coiled at his side. "Move faster, Eli," he shouts at an older man who is struggling to keep pace, his back bent from a lifetime of this work. "You're falling behind the quota." "Sorry, Massa," Eli says, his voice carefully neutral, his eyes fixed on the ground. "These old bones just don't move like they used to." The overseer's whip cracks across Eli's back, leaving a bloody, instantly swelling welt on his coarse linen shirt. "Then I'll give them some encouragement to move faster." Largely by the back-breaking labor of Irish immigrants, connected the Great Lakes and the agricultural heartland of the Midwest to New York City and the Atlantic Ocean. It slashed the cost of shipping goods by over 90%, turning New York City into the nation's preeminent commercial and financial hub, and unleashing a torrent of agricultural products onto world markets. Soon a new and even more transformative technology, the railroad, would begin to stitch the vast, sprawling country together even more tightly, shrinking time and distance in ways that were previously unimaginable. In newly established factory towns like Lowell, Massachusetts, a new kind of life, and a new kind of worker, was emerging. Young, unmarried women, known as mill girls, left the isolation and drudgery of farm life to work in massive, state-of-the-art textile factories. The work was grueling and dangerous, 14-hour days, 6 days a week, in a deafening lint-filled environment where accidents were common. But it offered something revolutionary for women of that era: a wage. Imagine you are one of these mill girls in 1835. You wake at 4:30 a.m. to the harsh, insistent clang of a factory bell. You live in a cramped, strictly supervised, company-owned boarding house with a dozen other young women. At 19, the constant thunderous roar of the power looms has already begun to damage your hearing, and you have a persistent hacking cough from the cotton fibers that hang thick in the air. But at the end of the week, you are paid in cash. Sometimes at night, I think my lungs will burst from the dust, and the noise is so great I cannot hear my own thoughts. You write in a letter to your sister back on the family farm in New Hampshire. Asterisk, but last week, with my own money, I bought a book of poetry by Mr. Keats. Can you imagine such a thing, Sarah? My own book, purchased with money I earned myself, with my own 2 hands. Asterisk, it was a small, but profound and deeply empowering taste. It was absolute, unmitigated chaos. A massive, muddy, and largely drunken crowd surged into the executive mansion. Men in muddy boots, their faces flushed with whiskey and excitement, stood on priceless silk-upholstered furniture to get a better view. Fights broke out over the barrels of whiskey punch, and thousands of dollars worth of presidential china was shattered as the crowd grabbed for refreshments. Jackson himself, a man who had faced down British cannons and hostile Indian tribes, was nearly crushed by his own adoring supporters and had to be hustled out a back window to the safety of a nearby hotel. A distinguished Supreme Court justice, watching the mayhem in abject horror from a corner of the trashed East Room, exclaimed to a friend, "The mob is in the White House.
This is the reign of King Mob."
But this was the dawn of a new, rowdier, and in some ways more inclusive American democracy, at least for white men. The last remaining property requirements for voting were dropped in most states, and politics became a passionate, popular, and intensely partisan affair. But this celebrated era of the common man was a catastrophe for others. The Indian Removal Act, the genocidal Trail of Tears, these were the dark, bloody, and unforgivable underbelly of Jacksonian democracy. It was a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, provided, of course, that those people were white and male. At the same time, the American economy was undergoing a profound and disruptive transformation, a shift so fundamental that historians call it the market revolution. The old world of local subsistence farming was rapidly giving way to a new world of commercial agriculture, mass-produced goods from factories, and a complex, interconnected national market. This was made possible by a revolution in transportation. The completion of the Erie Canal in 1825 was a game-changer of epic proportions. This man-made river, a 363-mile marvel of engineering, dug, hunted down, tortured, and murdered his political opponents, the Unitarios, who favored a more centralized government. Their bodies were often left in public, their throats cut in a signature style, a gruesome message to anyone who dared to dissent. Imagine 2 university students walking briskly, their heads down, through the tense, watchful streets of Buenos Aires in the 1840s. "Did you hear what happened to the poet Echeverria?" one whispers, his eyes darting around nervously, avoiding eye contact with the men wearing the red ribbon of Rosas's Federalist Party. "They found him this morning in a ditch near the river," the other replies, his voice barely audible, his lips hardly moving. "They had cut his tongue out for writing a poem critical of the restaurator, of Rosas." "They killed him for a poem?" the first student asks, a tremor of horrified disbelief in his voice. "No," his friend corrects him, his voice flat and cold. "They killed him to show that they can. That is the only message that matters in this city now." They fall into a terrified silence as a group of swaggering mazurqueros, their faces hardened by violence, passes by, their eyes scanning the faces of the pedestrians for any sign of fear or defiance. This was life under the caudillos, a fragile, suffocating order maintained by institutionalized terror. Meanwhile, the United States was experiencing its own tumultuous era of political change under President Andrew Jackson. Jackson, the hero of New Orleans, the rough-hewn frontier general, styled himself as the champion of the common man against the corrupt, effete East Coast elites. His inauguration in 1829 was a spectacle unlike any the young capital city of Washington had ever seen. Thousands of ordinary farmers, laborers, and frontiersmen, many of whom had traveled hundreds of miles, descended on the city to celebrate the victory of their hero. After the official ceremony, Jackson, in a gesture of populist bravado, threw open door. The government, a revolving door of generals and factions, seems to change with the seasons. And Simón Bolívar, the great liberator, the man who was once hailed as the George Washington of South America, is dying in a borrowed house on the coast of Colombia, his magnificent dream of a united South America having shattered into a dozen pieces. You walk to the Central Market and find that the price of basic cornmeal has tripled in a month. 6 reals. A woman with a hungry child clinging to her skirt shrieks at a vendor. 2 weeks ago it was 3.
Are you asif?
The vendor just shrugs, his face a mask of weary resignation. The roads aren't safe, senora.
Bandit eat the last 2 shipments from the country seat.
What can I do? I have a family to feed as well. A soldier from the local garrison, lounging nearby, overhears and scoffs.
Bandit?
Or do you mean Colonel Vargas's men, who now call themselves tax collectors and demand a tribute from every cart that passes? This was the new bleak reality. The wars for independence had created a massive power vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped a new quintessentially Latin American kind of leader, the caudillo. These were military strongmen, charismatic, often brutal leaders who had commanded armies during the wars of independence and now used that power, the loyalty of their armed followers, to seize control of a region or an entire nation. They ruled not by constitutional law, but by force of personality, patronage, and the ever-present threat of violence. They brought a brutal kind of order to the chaos, but at a terrible cost to the ideals of democracy and liberty for which the revolutions had supposedly been fought. In Argentina, the quintessential caudillo, Juan Manuel de Rosas, ruled the province of Buenos Aires with an iron bloody fist. He had a secret police force and paramilitary death squad, the Mazorca, that. Some questions are simply too painful, too impossible to answer. By 1825, the map of the Americas had been fundamentally, violently, and irrevocably redrawn. The age of European empires was ending, its foundations rotted from within and shattered from without.
A new, uncertain age, the age of nation, had begun.
But this new era would be defined by its own brutal struggles. The desperate fight to build stable governments out of the chaos and ruin of war, the increasingly bitter and intractable political clash over the expansion of slavery, and the growing ominous shadow of a new ambitious power in the hemisphere, the United States, which had just unilaterally declared, through its bold and arrogant Monroe Doctrine, that the entire Western Hemisphere was its own backyard, and the old European powers were no longer welcome to intervene. A prescient Colombian diplomat, hearing of this new American doctrine, remarked darkly to a colleague over brandy, "It seems we have merely traded one master for another, a master who, most unfortunately for us, lives much closer to home." Here's the dirty, rarely spoken secret about revolutions. Winning them is often the easy part. The real, grinding, soul-crushing work comes afterward. It's one thing to unite a diverse population against a common, hated foreign enemy. It's another thing entirely to build a functioning, stable, and just country from the ashes of war and the rubble of a collapsed social order. By 1830, most of Latin America was politically free from Spain, but now came the monumental, perhaps impossible, headache of self-governance. And it did not go well.
Wake up in Caracas, Venezuela, in 1830.
The revolutionary fervor that once electrified these streets is a distant, hollow memory. The air is thick not with cries of libertad, but with the grim realities of a nation in collapse. The economy, shattered by over a decade of brutal warfare, is in shambles. In the 1830s, under President Andrew Jackson, a man who had built his political and military career as a notoriously brutal Indian fighter, this process was formalized into a national policy of forced removal. Despite the fact that many of these tribes, most notably the Cherokee, had made extraordinary, and in many ways heartbreaking efforts to assimilate into American society, they had adopted American-style farming, created a written language, the Cherokee syllabary, invented by Sequoyah, drafted a formal constitution modeled on that of the United States, and had even, in a tragic irony, adopted the Southern practice of owning black slaves. They were deemed an obstacle to progress, an impediment to the expansion of cotton and the enrichment of white settlers. They were sitting on land that white men coveted. In a series of legally dubious treaties and ultimately through brute military force, they were forced from their ancestral homes in the fertile southeastern United States, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and marched at gunpoint by the U.S. Army to a designated arid and largely unfamiliar Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, west of the Mississippi River. This brutal, death-filled, forced migration, in which thousands of men, women, and children died from disease, starvation, and exposure during the harsh winter march, became known as the Trail of Tears. An elderly Cherokee chief, a man who had fought alongside Andrew Jackson against the British in the War of 1812 and had once considered him a friend, walks westward with his people, his heart not just broken, but filled with a sense of profound, soul-crushing betrayal. His young grandson, weak from hunger and shivering with fever, tugs on his sleeve. "Will we ever go home, grandfather?" the boy asks, his voice small and thin, his eyes wide with a confusion that mirrors the chief's own despair. The old man looks away, at the endless, unfamiliar, and desolate horizon of the western plains. Labor-intensive crop into a global commodity of immense value. This created an almost insatiable demand, a cotton rush for new land in the deep south, the fertile, rich black soil of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and for a massive, ever-growing workforce of enslaved human labor to clear that land and work it from sunrise to sunset. Picture a wealthy plantation owner, a younger son from a Virginia family seeking to make his fortune, and his tough, weather-beaten overseer, standing on a patch of freshly cleared land in Mississippi, the air still hazy and acrid with smoke from the burning trees and stumps. "We'll need another 20 prime hands for these new fields come spring," the owner says, gesturing with his elegant riding crop at the vast expanse of raw red earth that stretches to the horizon. The slave traders down in Natchez have a new shipment, a coffle, coming up the river from Virginia next month. The overseer replies matter-of-factly, his eyes narrowed as he calculates the labor required. "Good, strong, field-seasoned workers," they say. "Mostly young men and breeding-age women." The owner nods, satisfied. "Excellent. Make sure we get our pick of the best before the Johnsons do. I hear they're expanding their acreage again this year." They speak of human beings, men, women, and children torn from their families in the Upper South and sold in this second Middle Passage to the booming cotton plantations of the Deep South, as if they are livestock or farm equipment, interchangeable units of labor, entries in a financial ledger. This is the chilling, dehumanizing calculus of the burgeoning cotton kingdom. And what of the people who had lived on these southern lands for millennia, the original inhabitants of this continent? The indigenous peoples, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole, whom white Americans condescendingly called the 5 civilized tribes, were systematically and ruthlessly pushed aside. "2 more days, God willing," he replies, his eyes fixed on the faint trail ahead, his face a mask of hope, determination, and profound exhaustion. Then the real work begins. And the work was brutal, almost unimaginable by modern standards. These were not the vast, open prairies of the later West. This was a land of dense, ancient, hardwood forests. Settlers had to clear this forest with nothing but hand axes, a Herculean, soul-crushing task that could take a man a full year just to clear a few acres for a first planting. They had to build their own log cabins from the massive trees they felled, chinking the countless gaps with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair to keep out the wind and snow. They had to break the tough, virgin soil, thick with a web of ancient roots, using primitive, often ineffective plows, which were frequently pulled not by horses, but by a single, stubborn, slow-moving ox. They hunted for much of their food deer, turkey, squirrel, all while facing the constant threats of disease. Malaria, known as ague, was rampant, harsh and unpredictable weather, farming accidents that could cripple or kill, and the crushing, profound isolation of the frontier. It was a life of relentless, back-breaking hardship, but it was driven by a dream more powerful than any hardship, the promise of owning your own land, of being your own master, of escaping the hierarchies and economic constraints of the more settled East. For people whose ancestors had been landless laborers or tenant farmers for generations in Europe, this was an almost irresistible, quasi-religious lure. But this westward expansion, this celebrated American story of the hardy, self-reliant pioneer, had a dark, inseparable, and tragic twin: the expansion of the institution of slavery. The invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney in 1793 had made short staple cotton, a variety that could grow in the interior of the South, incredibly profitable. It turned what was once a marginal independence on the battlefield, it turned out, was one thing. Building stable, prosperous, and just nations from the ruins of a colonial society would prove to be a far more difficult, more painful, and more elusive challenge. These new countries were left with shattered economies, cities in ruins, deep and bitter social and racial divisions, and a crippling political legacy of authoritarian militarized rule. Bolívar himself, the great liberator, died in 1830, sick with tuberculosis, impoverished, and profoundly disillusioned, watching his grand dream of a united South America fall apart into a chaos of bickering, rival nations, and petty civil wars. His supposed last words were a testament to his profound tragic despair: "America is ungovernable. Those who have served the revolution have plowed the sea." While Latin America was consumed by the fires of revolutionary war, the United States was relentlessly, inexorably pushing west, an unstoppable demographic tide of land-hungry settlers. Imagine you're a child in a cramped, swaying covered wagon, somewhere in what will one day be the state of Indiana, around the year 1820. Your family sold your small, worn-out farm in the crowded hills of Pennsylvania 6 weeks ago. Everything you own in the world, a few pieces of crude, handmade furniture, a chest of tools, sacks of precious seed corn, your mother's spinning wheel, the heavy family Bible with its records of births and deaths, is packed into this creaking, canvas-topped wagon, your home on wheels. Tucked safely in a leather pouch inside your father's coat is a precious piece of paper, a land grant from the federal government for 160 acres of what is officially and misleadingly called virgin forest. When will we get there, Pa? You ask for the 100th time, peering out at the endless, monotonous, and somewhat menacing wall of dark trees that has been sliding by for what feels like an eternity. The very heart of Spanish power in South America, declaring its independence in 1821. By 1822, Spanish power on the South American mainland was broken, shattered, bleeding out. The two great liberators of the continent, the fiery, charismatic Bolívar and the stoic, reserved San Martín, met in the tropical port city of Guayaquil, Ecuador. What was said in their famous, lengthy, and completely private meeting remains one of history's great, tantalizing mysteries. No notes were taken, no witnesses were present. They were two titans, two giant egos, with different visions for the future of the continent they had liberated. Bolívar was a Republican. San Martín, it was rumored, favored some form of constitutional monarchy. But we know the result. San Martín, the quiet professional soldier, a man seemingly devoid of personal ambition for political power, abruptly and shockingly retired from public life and sailed into a self-imposed, lonely exile in Europe, leaving the final glory and the monumental task of finishing the liberation of the continent to Bolívar. Why did you step aside, General? Why did you yield to him? His loyal aide Bernardo O'Higgins of Chile asked him as their ship pulled away from the South American coast for the last time. San Martín gazed back at the receding, mist-shrouded shoreline of the continent he had freed. Because, he is reported to have said with a world-weary sigh, South America is not big enough for both Bolívar and me. By 1825, a geopolitical earthquake of world historical proportions had occurred. An immense, powerful, and wealthy empire that had lasted for over 3 centuries had crumbled into dust in less than 2 decades. A host of new nations were born from its ashes: Mexico, the short-lived United Provinces of Central America, Gran Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, named, in a rather audacious and egocentric move, after Bolívar himself, Chile, and the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, later Argentina. But winning. Imagine you are a soldier, a gaucho from the warm plains of Argentina, in this army of the Andes. You wake up in a makeshift camp surrounded by a desolate, alien landscape of bare, jagged rock and eternal, blindingly white ice.
Yor limburn ouis evri rac de bris, à conditions locales qu'au l'astérisque soroche astérisque, or mountain sickness. Your lips are cracked and bleeding from the relentless, DRY winden the punishing sun.
You wrap yourself in thin wool blankets, but the bone-deep penetrating cold seems to seep into your very marrow. You've watched dozens of your comrades and countless precious animals collapse and die, not from an enemy's bullet, but from the brutal altitude sickness, the freezing temperatures, and from slipping off the icy, precipitous paths into the yawning abyss below. How much further, guide? You ask a local mountain guide, his face the color of leather, his expression as impassive as the mountains themselves, your voice a hoarse, desperate croak. 2 more days to the Uspiata Pass, the summit, he replies, his gaze scanning the sky for any sign of a changing weather pattern.
If the astérisque vient au blanco astérisque, the white wind, doesn't come.
then a week down the other side, into Chile. He doesn't mention what will happen if the white wind, the dreaded, sudden, and lethal Andean blizzard, does come. He doesn't have to. The frozen, mummified bodies of travelers from years past are their own silent warning. Somehow, miraculously, through sheer force of will and San Martin's meticulous planning, they made it. San Martin's army descended from the mountains like an avenging avalanche, catching the Spanish royalist forces in Chile completely by surprise. They won a decisive, brilliant victory at the Battle of Chacabuco, liberated the capital of Santiago, and secured the independence of Chile. Then, with the help of the newly created Chilean navy, San Martin did the unthinkable again. He sailed his army north, landed on the coast of Peru, and marched on Lima. "Then we will try again," Bolívar replied without a moment's hesitation, his dark eyes fixed on the distant shore as if he could already see the future. And again if we must. Until we are free, or until I am dead." He wasn't just fighting for the independence of Venezuela. He had a breathtakingly ambitious dream, a vision that bordered on the fantastical, a united Spanish America, a single great republic, which he called Gran Colombia, that would stretch from the Andes to the Caribbean, a powerful new nation to rival the United States and the great powers of Europe. Meanwhile, far to the south, in the plains of Argentina, another great leader was preparing for one of the most audacious and brilliant military feats in modern history. José de San Martín, an Argentine general who had spent decades as a professional officer in the Spanish army fighting against Napoleon in Europe, understood with the cold, clear logic of a master strategist that the independence of Argentina and the rest of the South would never be secure as long as the Spanish held their main continental stronghold in the heavily fortified viceroyalty of Peru. His plan was to do what all other military experts of the day considered utterly impossible: to march an army not around, but over the towering snow-capped Andes Mountains, the second highest mountain range in the world, to surprise and liberate Chile from Spanish control, and then to build a navy to attack the fortress of Peru by sea. The Andes crossing was a logistical and human nightmare, an epic of endurance that rivals Hannibal's crossing of the Alps. An army of 5,000 men, along with thousands of horses and pack mules, dragged heavy cannons and tons of supplies over treacherous, narrow mountain passes nearly 3 miles high, where the oxygen-starved air was thin and knife-sharp, and the temperatures at night plummeted far below freezing. They called us rabble. Well, today, the rabble has taught them a lesson. The victory at New Orleans was militarily meaningless in the grand scheme of the war, but psychologically, for the young American nation, it was immense. It turned the irascible Andrew Jackson into a national hero of mythical proportions and gave Americans a swaggering, often arrogant sense of national pride and a powerful belief in their own unique destiny. This newfound nationalism would fuel their relentless, and often ruthless, push westward across the continent. In South America, the wars for independence were being waged on a truly epic scale, a continental canvas of brutal warfare, brilliant strategy, and incredible human endurance, led by two towering and remarkably different figures: the passionate, visionary, and aristocratic Simón Bolívar in the north and the quiet, pragmatic, professional soldier José de San Martín in the south. After early, crushing defeats that had nearly extinguished the revolutionary flame in Venezuela, Bolívar had been forced into a bitter exile on the island of Jamaica. But he refused to give up.
Et rot, et ploted, et plan.
In 1816, he returned to the mainland, his resolve hardened by failure, his vision for a liberated South America clarified. He had secured crucial financial and military aid from the newly independent nation of Haiti, a profound and often overlooked act of solidarity from one revolution to another, from the world's first black republic to the aspiring republics of the South. Standing on the pitching deck of his flagship as the mountainous coastline of his beloved Venezuela came into view, one of his loyal but weary officers, who had shared his exile, asked, "What if we fail again, Liberator? What if the Spanish are simply too strong for us?" The US did manage to win some surprising and morale-boosting victories at sea, where its powerful new frigates like the USS Constitution proved more than a match for their British counterparts in single-ship duels. The war ultimately ended in what was essentially a stalemate. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in the neutral city of Ghent in December 1814, essentially just pushed the reset button, returning all captured territory and returning everything to the status quo antebellum, the way it was before the war. But here's the strange part: Americans, in a collective act of brilliant national myth-making, celebrated it as a glorious victory, a second war of independence. This was largely thanks to a battle that, due to the slow speed of transatlantic communication, was fought after the peace treaty had already been signed. At the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, General Andrew Jackson, a tough-as-nails, profane, an utterly ruthless frontier commander, led a ragtag multi-ethnic army of regular soldiers, Jean Lafitte's pirates, backwoods militiamen from Kentucky and Tennessee, and free black men to a stunning, almost unbelievable victory over a superior force of elite British veterans, the very men who had defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. As Jackson walks the misty corpse-strewn battlefield the next morning, surveying the horrifying carnage, the numbers are staggering. Over 2,000 British casualties, killed, wounded, or captured, compared to just a handful of Americans. "My God, General," his young aide whispers in awe, his face pale and sickened by the sight. "We've destroyed the finest soldiers of the British Empire." Jackson's weathered face is a grim, unreadable mask. He had hated the British his entire life, having been captured and scarred by a British officer as a boy during the Revolution. "Remember this day," he says, his voice a low, cold growl. "They said American farmers and frontiersmen couldn't stand against the disciplined professionals of Europe." Claimed he was a British deserter because he had a faint accent from his mother's side. The boy's never even seen England in his life. He was born in Marblehead, just like me and my father before me. His friend, a ship's carpenter, nods grimly, his knuckles white around his own tankard. "President Madison has to do something. We didn't fight a whole revolution, we didn't bleed on the fields of Concord and Yorktown, just to let the British treat us like we're still their goddamn colony, to steal our sons from under our very noses." In June of 1812, President James Madison, pushed by a powerful faction of young aggressive congressmen from the West and South known as the War Hawks, did do something. The United States declared war on Great Britain. It was an incredibly bold, some might say spectacularly foolish move. America was a young, weak, and deeply divided nation taking on the world's reigning superpower, a nation that was simultaneously engaged in a titanic, existential death struggle with Napoleon's France. The War of 1812 was a strange, often humiliating, and ultimately inconclusive conflict for the Americans. An attempted invasion of Canada, which the War Hawks had arrogantly boasted would be a mere matter of marching, was a complete and utter disaster, repulsed by a combination of British regulars, Canadian militia, and their Native American allies under the brilliant Shawnee leader Tecumseh. In August of 1814, in the war's most humiliating moment for the young republic, British troops captured Washington, D.C. The American government, including President Madison, had fled in a panic. In retaliation for the earlier American burning of the Canadian capital of York, present-day Toronto, the British burned the White House, the Capitol building, including the Library of Congress, and other public structures to the ground. As the flames consumed the symbols of American democracy, it seemed the entire Republican experiment might be going up in smoke. A commitment to land reform. This, of course, only further terrified the conservative Creoles. They wanted independence, but on their own terms, an independence that would simply replace the peninsulars with themselves at the very top of the social and political pyramid, leaving the fundamental structure of exploitation intact. While Mexico was convulsing in the first throes of its long and bloody revolution, the United States was stumbling, almost reluctantly, into a strange and consequential war of its own. The ongoing Napoleonic Wars in Europe, a global conflict between Great Britain and France, had put the neutral American Republic in an impossible position. Both belligerents were interfering with neutral U.S. shipping on the high seas, seizing ships and cargo at will as part of their economic warfare against each other. But the British were doing something that Americans found particularly, personally, and nationally infuriating: impressment. The powerful British Royal Navy, always short of experienced sailors, would stop American ships on the open ocean, board them, and forcibly kidnap sailors they claimed were British deserters, forcing them into the harsh and brutal service of the King's Navy. While some were indeed deserters, many were American citizens, seized from under their own flag. In a smoky, crowded Boston tavern, its air thick with the smell of rum and political argument, a weathered sailor, his face a roadmap of years at sea, slams his pewter tankard on the table, sloshing ale onto the dark, scarred wood. "They took my own son," he rages to his companions, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and fury. "Right off the deck of our merchant ship, the Good Hope, not 10 leagues out from Nantucket. This is the apocalypse. It is the end of our world." He wasn't entirely wrong. The Creole elites, even those who secretly sympathized with the cause of independence, were profoundly, existentially terrified. They saw in Hidalgo's mob the potential destruction of their own privileged world, a social revolution that would append the entire hierarchy they sought to control, not just remove the peninsulars from the top. The professional Spanish royalist army eventually regrouped. Their disciplined, well-armed soldiers, many of them veterans of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, crushed Hidalgo's untrained, poorly equipped peasant force in a series of brutal one-sided battles. Hidalgo was captured while trying to flee north to the United States. He was publicly stripped of his priesthood in a humiliating ceremony of degradation, and then executed by firing squad. As a final gruesome warning to all who would dare challenge the might and the wrath of Spanish rule, his severed head, along with those of his top lieutenants, was sent back to Guanajuato and hung in a cage from one of the four corners of the public granary he had stormed. It would remain there, rotting in the sun, for 10 years. It didn't work. The flame of rebellion had been lit, and it would not be so easily extinguished. Another priest, José María Morelos, a brilliant military strategist and a more sophisticated political thinker than Hidalgo, took up the blood-soaked banner of the insurgency. Morelos, himself a mestizo of humble origins, created a smaller but more disciplined and effective guerrilla army. And unlike Hidalgo, who was more a prophet of vengeance than a political leader, Morelos had a clear political vision for a new independent Mexico. At a Congress he convened in 1813, he called for a formal declaration of independence, the abolition of the hated caste system, the end of all forms of slavery and forced tribute, and the establishment of a republic with universal male suffrage with deadly, skull-crushing force, ancient, rust-pitted muskets, and a burning righteous fury that had been simmering for generations. They marched under a banner bearing the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the dark-skinned patron saint of Mexico, a powerful symbol of their faith and their identity. They were fueled by centuries of simmering rage against a system that had systematically exploited them, starved them through recurring famines, and treated them as less than human. When a captured aristocratic Spanish officer, appalled by the sight of his captors, disdainfully asked a captured indigenous fighter why on earth he would follow this rabble-rousing priest, the man's eyes hardened with a cold, unforgiving fire. "Because he promises us our land back," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Because he tells us we are men, not animals to be worked like oxen in the fields. When was the last time a Spaniard said that to me?" The army swelled to a staggering, almost unbelievable 80,000 people as it swept through the countryside, a human tidal wave of vengeance. They marched on the fabulously wealthy silver mining city of Guanajuato, and after a bloody, desperate battle for a massive stone granary, the Alhóndiga de Granaditas, where the city's Spanish and Creole elite had taken refuge with their fortunes, they overran it. What followed was not a strategic military occupation, but a horrific, unrestrained massacre. The peasant army, a force of pure elemental rage unleashed from the shackles of 3 centuries of oppression, went on a rampage. They killed hundreds of Spanish and Creole elites indiscriminately, men, women, and children. They looted their opulent homes, stripped the churches of their silver and gold, and set much of the beautiful city ablaze. It was an act of ferocious, bloody, and terrifying revenge. "This isn't a revolution," a wealthy Creole merchant who had managed to escape by hiding in a sewer said to his wife as they fled the burning city. "My children!" His voice, trained for the pulpit and accustomed to commanding attention, boomed across the town square, startling the pigeons from the rooftops. "The moment of our liberation is at hand. A new dispensation comes to us today. Will you free yourselves from the tyranny that has oppressed you for 300 years? Will you take back the land stolen from your forefathers?" A visceral, uncertain murmur went through the crowd, which quickly swelled into a roar of pent-up rage and sudden electrifying hope. "Will you defend your rights as true patriots, in the name of God and our stolen King Ferdinand?"
Asterisco Viva la Virgen de Guadalupe. Mueran los gachupines. Viva México. Asterisco Lo Life de Virgin of Guadalupe.
Death to the Spaniards. Long live Mexico. The chant was picked up and spread like wildfire, a cry of profound religious fervor and nascent, bloody nationalism. This was the Grito de Dolores, the cry of Dolores, and it kicked off Mexico's brutal, chaotic, and 11-year-long war for independence. And this would not be a polite war between gentlemen soldiers in colorful uniforms. The struggle for freedom in Latin America was a messy, multi-layered, and horrifyingly violent conflict. It was a war against the colonial power of Spain, but it was also a series of vicious civil wars fought within the emerging nations themselves. Creoles fought peninsulars. Liberals fought conservatives. And woven throughout all of it, giving the conflict its particular ferocity, were the desperate struggles of indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans, fighting not just for national liberation, but for their own freedom from centuries of grinding, soul-destroying oppression. Hidalgo's army was not a disciplined military force. It was a massive, angry, and largely uncontrollable human horde, a peasant crusade. It was an army of the dispossessed, armed with whatever they could find. Farm tools like sharpened hoes and wickedly curved machetes, slings that could hurl a rock. "Are you certain this is wise, my dear?" his wife asks, her voice laced with a tremor of aristocratic anxiety as she watches from the doorway of their elegant, sun-filled bedroom. The viceroy still commands the royalist army. This could lead to war, to ruin. He meets her gaze in the mirror, his expression firm, resolute, the face of a man who has crossed his own personal Rubicon. "The army," he says, his voice quiet but firm, "is filled with Creoles like me. And we have had enough of Spanish rule. Enough of being treated like inferiors in our own home." As he steps out into the crisp morning air of the Plaza de Mayo, the city feels electric, humming with a dangerous, intoxicating, and world-changing possibility. In the central plaza, crowds of citizens are already gathering, their voices rising in a single defiant roar, demanding change, demanding a new destiny. The old world is cracking apart at the seams, and a new one is about to be born in its place, baptized in blood and fire. The morning of September 16, 1810, in the small, dusty Mexican town of Dolores, began like any other. The air was cool and bone-dry, the sky over the Guanajuato highlands a brilliant, cloudless, and almost violent blue. But when the great bronze church bells began to ring, their familiar rhythmic clang echoing across the valley, they were not calling the people to morning mass. They were calling them to revolution. Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, a man whose ideas were as radical as his faith was deep, a man who had read the forbidden works of the French Enlightenment in secret, stood on the steps of his church. He was not a young firebrand. He was nearly 60, with a bald pate and a fringe of white hair, but his eyes blazed with a holy righteous fire as he looked out at the growing, confused crowd of his parishioners, indigenous peasants, mestizo miners, and poor laborers, who had gathered before him. Yet, out of this profound hardship, this crucible of survival, a new kind of person was being forged, a new national character, the American. Fiercely, almost belligerently independent, stubbornly self-reliant, endlessly practical, and increasingly, profoundly distinct from their more refined, more traditional European cousins. The year 1810 arrives. The stage is set across the vast hemisphere for a decade of violent, revolutionary, and nation-defining change. In the small Mexican town of Dolores, the charismatic parish priest named Miguel Hidalgo is meeting in secret with other Creole and mestizo conspirators, plotting an uprising that he envisions not just as a war for political independence, but as a holy crusade for social justice. It is not enough, my friends, to simply replace the arrogant Spanish rulers with arrogant Creole ones, he argues passionately to his fellow plotters, his eyes shining with conviction. We must fight for an end to the tribute, for an end to slavery, for the return of land to the indigenous peoples, for true justice for the poor and the oppressed in the eyes of God. A wealthy Creole landowner in the room, a man who had joined the conspiracy out of a desire to protect his own wealth and power from the grasping hands of the Spanish crown, shifts uncomfortably in his high-backed chair. This talk of land reform and social revolution is not what he signed up for at all. This fundamental irreconcilable tension, between a conservative desire for a simple transfer of political power among elites and a radical vision for a complete social revolution from the bottom up, will define, complicate, and bloody the struggles to come. In the southern port city of Buenos Aires, a wealthy Creole man stands before a gilded full-length mirror imported from Venice, carefully adjusting his fine silk cravat. It is May 25, 1810. Today the Cabildo, the town council, will vote on whether to depose the Spanish viceroy and form its own government. The relentless tide of white settlers. It was the sheer, unrelenting harshness of existence. A simple broken leg, incurred while felling a tree, with no doctor for 100 miles, could easily become infected with gangrene and lead to a slow, agonizing death. Childbirth, attended only by a neighbor woman with no medical training, was terrifyingly dangerous for both mother and child. And winter was a season of profound dread, a white-shrouded silent battle for survival against the elemental forces of cold and starvation. Imagine being snowed in. It's January, and a blizzard has been raging for 3 days, piling snow up to the cabin's windows. The temperature outside is well below freezing, and the wind howls through the countless gaps between the logs, a mournful, hungry sound, like a wolf at the door. Your cabin is just one room, heated by a single voracious fireplace that consumes a massive amount of wood. The side of you facing the fire might be sweating, while your back, just a few feet away, feels like it's freezing solid. At night, The water in the bucket by the door freezes into a solid block of ice. You sleep fully clothed, huddled with your entire family under every blanket, bearskin, and deer hide you own, listening to the wind and praying for the dawn. The isolation is perhaps the most crushing part of it all. Your nearest neighbor is miles away, a journey of a full day through dense, snow-choked forest. There is no phone, no mail, no doctor. If illness, injury, or an attack comes, you are utterly and completely on your own, a tiny flickering candle of human existence in a vast, indifferent wilderness. Sometimes I do not see another human soul besides my own husband and children for months at a time, a frontier woman from Ohio wrote in her journal, her ink freezing as she wrote. The deep, profound silence of the forest can make you forget the sound of your own voice, can make you wonder if you still exist at all outside of this small cabin. The Appalachian Mountains into the dense, dark forests of western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and the contested violent territory known as the dark and bloody ground of Kentucky. Dawn breaks cold and misty over a small hard-won clearing in the seemingly endless primeval Kentucky wilderness. A single rough-hewn log cabin, looking small and fragile against the towering forest, stands in the center, a thin gray plume of smoke curling from its crude mud and stick chimney. A man emerges from the cabin's low doorway, his long rifle held comfortably and familiarly in the crook of his arm. He scans the dense, silent wall of trees that surrounds his tiny man-made island of civilization before heading to a crude, three-sided barn to milk the family's lone bony cow. Inside the one-room cabin, his wife is already awake, moving silently in the semi-darkness. She is stirring a pot of cornmeal mush, the bland but filling staple of their diet, over the open fire that serves as their only source of heat and their only stove. Their 4 children are still asleep on straw pallets on the packed dirt floor, huddled together for warmth under a shared quilt. Saw signs of Indians near the Wilsons' place yesterday, the man says as he returns with a pail of frothing, warm milk, his voice low and carefully devoid of alarm. His wife's hands freeze for a fraction of a second over the pot, the only outward sign of the fear that is a constant low hum in the background of her life. Shawnee, I reckon, he continues, trying to sound casual, more for her sake than his own. Probably just a hunting party moving north for the summer. Should be fine, long as we don't bother them. The tension of frontier life is a constant, gnawing companion. It wasn't just the ever-present and often brutally violent conflict with Native Americans, the Shawnee, the Miami, the Delaware, who were, quite understandably, fighting a desperate, heroic, and ultimately losing battle to defend their ancestral lands from. Dramatic oath on a hilltop in Rome to never rest his body or his soul until his homeland was free from the chains of Spanish rule. He returned to South America, his mind ablaze with the revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment and a burning, almost messianic sense of his own destiny. In a dimly lit room in Caracas, its humid air thick with the scent of rich cigars and whispered conspiracy, Bolívar leans over a large, detailed map of the South American continent, his dark, piercing eyes burning with a passion that seems to consume him from within. He is surrounded by fellow Creoles, older, more cautious men, wealthy landowners who fear the chaos of a mob as much as they desire political power for themselves. Gentlemen, he says, his voice low but vibrating with a hypnotic, irresistible energy. The moment has arrived. Spain is crippled, leaderless, occupied by the French. Its empire is a headless beast. We will never have a better, more perfect opportunity to seize our own destiny, to create our own nations, to step onto the stage of world history. One of the older men, his face etched with the deep lines of worry, shifts nervously in his chair. But to openly declare independence, Don Simón? The Peninsulars, the Loyalists, they still control the professional army. They will fight. There will be terrible, ruinous bloodshed. Bolívar's intense gaze hardens, becoming as sharp and cold as obsidian. Blood, he states, his voice dropping to an almost reverential whisper, is the necessary price of liberty. It is the fertilizer of new republics. The only question before us, the only question that matters, is are we, as men, willing to pay it? The profound, heavy, and unbroken silence that fills the room is his answer. While Bolívar dreams of liberating an entire continent, life on the North American frontier is a world away, a daily, grinding struggle against a different, more ancient kind of tyranny, nature itself. By the early 1800s, the frontier has pushed over. Did you hear about Haiti? One enslaved man whispers to another as they chop cotton, their movements rhythmic and practiced, their eyes constantly scanning for the distant figure of the overseer on horseback. They killed their masters. All of them. They burned the plantations to the ground. They're free. Quiet! The other hisses, his eyes darting towards the overseer, his body tensing with fear. You want to get us all whipped? Or worse? Don't you even speak that name here. The trees have ears. The fear of slave rebellion was a constant, suffocating, and corrosive presence in the American South, a ghost that haunted every plantation, every political debate, every quiet night. In 1800, an enslaved blacksmith named Gabriel had organized a massive, well-planned revolt in Virginia, intending to march on Richmond, take the governor hostage, and demand an end to slavery. The plot was discovered at the very last minute, due to a torrential storm that washed out the roads and made it impossible for the conspirators to gather, and a betrayal by two fellow slaves who feared the consequences. Gabriel and 25 of his co-conspirators were publicly hanged. But the message was clear to everyone. The seemingly stable, ordered institution of slavery was, in fact, a powder keg, and the spark of Haiti could easily, at any moment, ignite it into a conflagration that would consume the entire South. Meanwhile, a young, wealthy, and impossibly handsome Creole aristocrat from Venezuela named Simón Bolívar was watching these world events with an electric, all-consuming intensity. He had been educated in Europe, had hobnobbed with intellectuals and radicals in the salons of Paris, had witnessed Napoleon's magnificent coronation in Milan, an event that both inspired and repulsed him, and most importantly, had sworn a solemn. The revolution was beginning, but in this strange, cautious, roundabout way, with no one daring to speak the I-word independence aloud. It was a delicate, high-stakes dance of plausible deniability, a revolution cloaked in the robes of loyalty. But there was one place in the Americas where the revolution had already happened, and it wasn't a polite, legalistic affair conducted by bewigged Creole elites. It was a firestorm of unimaginable violence and world-changing significance. In the fabulously wealthy French sugar colony of Saint-Domingue, which would be renamed Haiti, a massive, brilliantly organized, and brutally fought slave rebellion, the only successful large-scale slave rebellion in human history, had succeeded. In 1804, after years of savage warfare that defeated the armies of France, Britain, and Spain, Haiti became the second independent nation in the Americas, and the first free black republic in the world. This event sent a profound shockwave of abject terror through every slave-owning society in the hemisphere, from Virginia to Brazil. It was the nightmare that every planter, every slave owner, secretly feared.
Imagine waking up on a sprawling cotton plantation in the low country of Georgia in 1810.
If you are the white owner, you live in a grand white pillared house, cooled by wide, shady verandas, your every need met by a retinue of silent, ever-present enslaved servants. Your life is one of cultivated ease and gentility, a life of mint juleps and leisurely rides, a life built on a foundation of systematic, brutal, and profitable exploitation. If you are one of the enslaved, your world is a crude one-room wooden cabin with a packed dirt floor and no windows. You wake before sunrise to the harsh clang of a bell or the sharp crack of a horn, summoning you to another day of grueling, back-breaking labor in the cotton fields under a relentless, punishing sun and the ever-present threat of the overseer's whip. For the Creole elites, this is the moment they have been dreaming of, praying for, plotting for. It's their opening, their perfect heaven-sent excuse to seize the power they have so long been denied. Town councils, known as cabildos, begin to meet in urgent, often secret sessions across the Americas. In Caracas, in 1810, the Creole-dominated council makes a shrewd, carefully worded, and dramatic public declaration. We remain unshakably loyal to our beloved and unfortunate King Ferdinand. They announce with great solemnity and theatrical displays of patriotic grief. But since he is tragically imprisoned by the godless French, we must, for the good of the colony and for the preservation of his royal domain, take it upon ourselves to govern until his happy and inevitable return to the throne. It's a brilliant piece of political theater, a de facto declaration of self-rule masterfully disguised as an act of profound, unwavering loyalty. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. Similar governing councils, called juntas, spring up everywhere, from Bogota to Santiago. In Buenos Aires, a fiery young lawyer and radical intellectual named Mariano Moreno is working late into the night, his quill scratching furiously across parchment as he drafts a series of radical decrees for the new junta. His older, more cautious colleague, a wealthy merchant, looks over his shoulder at the papers, which outline audacious plans for opening the port to free trade with Britain and for the formation of a local citizen militia. Mariano, his colleague, observes dryly, his voice laced with deep concern, "We claim to be governing in the name of King Ferdinand, but these policies you're drafting look suspiciously like, well, they look an awful lot like independence." Moreno doesn't even look up from his work, his focus absolute, his eyes burning with revolutionary fervor. "How very observant of you, my friend," he murmurs, a faint, dangerous smile on his lips. "Perhaps you should keep that brilliant." He did so wearing a set of painful, clunky, and ill-fitting dentures. They weren't made of wood, as the popular myth goes, but from a gruesome, macabre, and frankly disgusting combination of hippopotamus ivory, gold wire, and horrifyingly real human teeth. Likely purchased from poor people desperate for cash or, even more grimly, pulled from the mouths of his own slaves at Mount Vernon. The president's new teeth cause him considerable and constant pain, his personal secretary, Tobias Lear, writes in a private letter to a friend. He can barely close his mouth, and the springs that hold them in place often force it open. Speaking at length, as he must do, is a great difficulty and a source of constant embarrassment for him. The stoic hero of the Revolution, the man who faced down the mighty British Empire, was tormented daily by his own mouth. Back in the sprawling, decadent, and now deeply troubled Spanish Empire, a short, ambitious, and utterly brilliant Frenchman is about to inadvertently light the fuse of revolution across an entire continent. In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte, now the undisputed master of Europe, decides to invade Spain and Portugal to enforce his continent-wide economic blockade against his last great rival, Great Britain. In a swift and cunning political maneuver, he forces the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII, to abdicate the throne and places his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as the new king of Spain. This single act of European high-stakes power politics throws the entire vast Spanish Empire into absolute, paralyzing chaos. Suddenly, colonial officials from the opulent palaces of Mexico City to the remote administrative outposts of Buenos Aires are faced with an impossible existential question. Who is our king? Who do we obey? The legitimate Spanish monarch of the Bourbon dynasty, now a humiliated prisoner of the French? Or this French usurper, this puppet king, this brother of the Antichrist who has conquered Catholic Spain? A hot, smoky, and constantly dangerous affair that requires managing a live fire all day long. You make your own soap from lye, a caustic chemical derived from wood ash that you produce yourself, and leftover animal fat, a process that could literally burn the skin from your hands if done incorrectly. You spin wool and flax into thread on a spinning wheel, a task that occupies countless hours. You then weave that thread into cloth on a large, cumbersome loom that might take up a quarter of your small cabin. Finally, you sew every single garment for your family by hand, by the dim, flickering light of a candle, late into the night. You preserve food for the long, lean winter, salting meat, drying fruits and vegetables, pickling cucumbers and cabbage, a constant, anxious battle against spoilage and starvation. And you raise children, lots of them. High infant and child mortality rates from diseases like diphtheria, scarlet fever, and smallpox meant that having many children was the only way to ensure some would survive to adulthood to help work the farm and care for you in your old age. And what about something as simple as a smile? It was a rare sight, at least a toothy one. People's teeth were, to put it mildly, a horrifying disaster. The increasing availability of sugar, coupled with a complete lack of any concept of dental hygiene, led to rampant decay, painful abscesses, and inevitable tooth loss. Dentistry was a barbaric and terrifying affair, usually performed by the local blacksmith, who had the strongest arms and the best pliers, or a traveling barber with a taste for surgery. The procedure typically involved a pair of rusty pliers, a strong shot of whiskey for the patient as a crude anesthetic, and the patient being held down by several strong men. By age 40, most people had lost the majority of their teeth, their mouths sunken, their speech affected. When George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States, a scheme to recreate the very British system of finance and centralized power we just fought a revolution to escape. Hamilton's intense, unblinking silence is his answer. This fundamental ideological argument, the epic tug-of-war between a strong, energetic, centralized federal government and the rights and sovereignty of the individual states, would become the central, recurring, and ultimately bloody drama of American politics for the next century and beyond. But let's step away from the high politics of Philadelphia and talk about the raw reality of daily life for most Americans. Forget electricity, running water, or even a simple trip to the grocery store. The vast majority of Americans are farmers, living lives of rugged, almost total self-sufficiency, lives that had not changed much in hundreds of years. They grow their own food, corn, squash, beans. They raise their own livestock, a few pigs, some chickens, a milk cow. They make their own clothes from wool they shear from their own sheep and flax they grow in their own fields. They build their own furniture from wood they cut on their own land. They brew their own beer or distill their own corn whiskey. Cash is a rare and precious commodity. Much of the local economy runs on a complex, trust-based system of barter and credit, all meticulously recorded in a local store owner's dusty ledger. I'll trade you 2 bushels of corn for a new pair of shoes for my boy, and you can put the 10 cents difference on my account, to be paid off after the harvest, is a common transaction. Your day starts at the first hint of pre-dawn light and ends at sunset, not because of some romantic notion of living in harmony with nature, but for the brutally practical reason that candles made from smelly, rendered animal fat, tallow, and whale oil for lamps are expensive. You work when there is light. For women, the labor is especially relentless, a never-ending cycle of physically demanding tasks. Cooking is done over an open heart. Of Virginia or Massachusetts than to this abstract and proven idea of a United States. Will it hold? A newspaper editor wonders aloud as he painstakingly sets individual metal letters of type into a composing stick for the day's edition of the Pennsylvania packet. There are already whispers of secession in the Western Territories, where farmers feel ignored by the coastal elites. Even in New England, there are those who say we'd be better off as our own confederacy. This whole enterprise feels profoundly precarious. Into this chaos of debt and division steps Alexander Hamilton, an immigrant from the West Indies, a man of brilliant, almost supernatural financial intellect, boundless energy, and notoriously poor people skills. He has a plan, a vision for the nation that is so audacious, so radical, that it borders on insane. So your idea, President George Washington asks, his brow furrowed with a general's deep-seated skepticism for complex paper-based schemes, is for the new federal government to assume, to take on, all the massive individual debts the 13 states ran up during the war, and to create a single powerful national bank, modeled on the Bank of England. Yes, Mr. President, Hamilton replies, his voice crisp and certain, radiating an almost arrogant, unshakable confidence. It will bind the wealthy creditors of every state, the merchants, the bankers, the landowners who hold all that state debt, to the success and survival of the federal government. If the federal government fails, they lose their fortunes. It will establish our credit with the great banking houses of Europe and create a stable, unified national economy, powered by a single currency. And this won't concentrate too much power in the hands of the central government, and specifically, in the hands of northern financiers.
Washington Press.
Men like Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Madison are already raising a storm of protest in Virginia, claiming it's a monarchical plot. Mundane, and incredibly difficult reality of building a nation from scratch. And it's not going well.
Wake Up in Philadelphia, 1789.
At 42,000 people, it's the largest city in the new republic, a bustling, muddy port on the Delaware River. You're likely in a cramped wooden house, 2 rooms if you're doing well, perhaps sharing it with another family and a few transient boarders. The comforting smell of a nearby bakery, baking bread before dawn, mingles with the ever-present pungent stench of horse manure from the unpaved streets and the open drains that serve as the city's rudimentary sewers. If you're wealthy, a merchant whose ships trade with the West Indies or a lawyer with a prosperous practice, your handsome 3-story brick home on Chestnut Street might have real, imported glass windows, a clear and expensive mark of true luxury that most can only dream of. Most people make do with oiled paper stretched over their window openings, a translucent, fragile barrier against the biting winter wind and the sweltering summer rain. The new Constitution has just been ratified, but it's an untested document, a fragile piece of paper born of compromise and intellectual debate, held together by hope and eloquent rhetoric. The first attempt at a national government, the Articles of Confederation, was a spectacular, almost comical failure. It had created a central government so weak it couldn't even collect taxes to pay its own bills or the pensions of the soldiers who had won the revolution. The states bickered like jealous, squabbling siblings, printing their own worthless currencies, and erecting trade barriers against each other. The national economy was in shambles, crippled by war debt. The country seemed on the verge of falling apart. An armed uprising of indebted farmers in Massachusetts, known as Shays' Rebellion, had recently terrified the Founding Fathers, proving that the Republic could collapse into anarchy. People felt more loyalty to their home state of. It's been working flawlessly for 300 years. It's genius. The new official laughs, a short, sharp, arrogant bark. Genius indeed. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. As it turned out, everything could go wrong. Because the Creoles, the wealthy, educated, American-born elite, were getting profoundly, dangerously tired of living in this gilded cage. They owned the mines and the land. but they were treated like second-class citizens in the land of their own birth, perpetually barred from the highest echelons of power in both the government and the church. Imagine a smoky tavern in Mexico City in 1795, the air thick with the smell of cheap tobacco and the sweet fermented scent of spilled pulque. A young Creole, his clothes impeccably tailored in the latest European fashion, his hair powdered, slams his silver cup on the rough-hewn table. My father owns half the silver mines in Potosi, the richest mountain on God's green earth. He complains bitterly to his friends, his voice rising with indignation. I studied law at the University of Salamanca, in Spain itself. I can quote Cicero and Aquinas in flawless Latin. Yet some glorified clerk, some peninsular fresh off the boat from the dusty plains of Seville, a man who doesn't know a peso from a potato, whose only qualification is the sheer luck of his birthplace, is appointed to the audiencia, the high court, while I am passed over again. He is furious, humiliated, his pride deeply stung. Unseen by him, his mestizo servant, refilling his cup with a steady practiced hand, listens intently. He hears the bitterness, the deep-seated resentment, the unmistakable whisper of sedition. He files it away. The cracks in the empire are not just showing, they are beginning to widen into chasms. Now let's travel thousands of miles north, to the fledgling, struggling, and deeply disunited United States of America. The revolutionary euphoria of victory over the mighty British Empire has faded, replaced by the grim obsession with control and rational, centralized order. At the heart of it all is a grand central plaza, or Zocalo, anchored by the twin powers of the empire, the massive, imposing cathedral on one side and the Viceroy's palace, the seat of royal authority, on the other. But this aesthetic of order was a beautiful facade. The real business of the empire wasn't civic planning or public health, it was extraction. The entire colonial system was a massive, intricate, highly regulated and centuries-old machine designed for one single overarching purpose: to systematically funnel the immense wealth of the Americas back to the mother country, Spain. Picture two Spanish officials in a shaded courtyard, shielded from the harsh sun by high stone walls and the leaves of a pomegranate tree. They are sipping a cool, dry sherry, a luxury imported from their homeland. One, newly arrived from Madrid, a man with a minor aristocratic title and a major sense of entitlement, is trying to grasp the elegant, brutal simplicity of the system. So let me be certain I understand this, he says, a slight tremor of avaricious disbelief in his voice. We dig silver and gold out of their mountains, using their indigenous people for the most brutal, life-destroying labor, often working them to death before they reach the age of 30. We ship all of it, every last ingot, back to Spain to finance our king's wars in Europe. Then our merchants, a legally protected monopoly, sell them Spanish-made goods, mediocre clothes, basic tools, our wine, our olive oil, at hugely inflated prices, and we legally forbid them from manufacturing these goods themselves or trading with anyone else, not the English, not the French, no one. His colleague, a jaded, cynical veteran of 30 years in the colonial bureaucracy, takes a slow, deliberate sip of his sherry and nods, a faint smile playing on his lips. It's called mercantilism, an elegant and self-sustaining system. Salons of the Creole elite where they read forbidden French philosophy, to the whispered, hopeful conversations in the slave quarters, are listening.
The tension is palpable.
You can feel it in the air, a static charge before a lightning storm, a sense that the world is holding its breath. Something is about to break. Imagine yourself walking through the streets of Mexico City, the jewel in the Spanish colonial crown, the most populous city in the Western Hemisphere. With 130,000 souls, it's a chaotic, vibrant, and deeply contradictory whirlwind of opulence and misery. Grandiose Baroque cathedrals, their ornate facades a testament to the incalculable wealth extracted from the earth, their twin spires scraping the impossibly blue sky, and ornate government palaces built from blood-red volcanic stone loom over a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets. But look closer. An open sewer, a sluggish river of human and animal waste, offal from the butcher shops, and chemical refuse from the tanneries, runs down the center of the street. The stench, especially in the heat of the midday sun, is a physical assault on the senses, a gag-inducing miasma of decay. A European visitor, himself no stranger to the filth of 18th-century London or Paris, wrote in his diary, "The odor is so powerful and offensive as to be unbearable. How people of quality, in their fine silks and horse-drawn carriages, manage to live here and not perish from the plague is beyond my comprehension." People don't just take out the trash, they hurl it from their second-story windows after a perfunctory, often ignored, shout of agua vie.
Astérisque, water coming.
You quickly learn to walk close to the buildings, your head tilted towards the sky, listening for the warning cry. Despite the squalor, there's a strange, rigid, almost obsessive order to the city's design. Following a royal decree from King Philip II in the 16th century, the Spanish planned their colonial cities on a perfect grid, a testament to their are spreading through the foundation, and the entire colossal structure is about to tremble. Let's pull back from this single town and look at the map of this world in 1789. It's a geography of empire, a canvas painted in the colors of distant European crowns. The Spanish crown controls a staggering, almost incomprehensible expanse of territory, a domain stretching from the sun-baked hills of California, through the deserts and highlands of Mexico, across the Isthmus of Panama, down the mountainous spine of the Andes, and across the vast plains of Argentina. The Portuguese hold the immense, resource-rich, and still largely unexplored prize of Brazil, a territory larger than all of Europe combined. The British, still smarting from the recent humiliating loss of their 13 prize colonies, loom in the north, holding onto the vast, cold emptiness of Canada and casting a wary, resentful eye on their upstart former subjects. And then there's that fledgling nation, that audacious, improbable, and deeply fragile experiment huddled along the Atlantic coast, the United States of America. Its very existence is a defiant, revolutionary statement. It has proven that a colony, with enough will, sacrifice, and blood, can throw off the yoke of a powerful European master. That is a dangerous idea, a virus of the mind that can cross oceans and borders. And just as that idea is taking root in the fertile imaginations of Creoles in Caracas and Buenos Aires, another, even more explosive and radical one, erupts across the ocean. In France, the absolute heart of European culture, philosophy, and power, a revolution has begun. Not just a war for independence, but a war against the very idea of monarchy, of aristocracy, of a world ordered by the accident of birthright. The cry for liberty, equality, fraternity is echoing across the Atlantic, carried in letters, in radical newspapers and pamphlets, in the minds of travelers and merchants. And people in the Americas, from the gilded cathedral, the silversmith, the shopkeeper presiding over your small store, the foreman in the mines, whose job it is to enforce the brutal labor quotas on the indigenous workers below you. You occupy the precarious, shifting, and often treacherous middle ground, forever caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. You are seen by the Spanish as more reliable and civilized than the natives, yet you will never be invited to dine at the home of a Creole grandee, never be accepted into their elite social circles. You are a necessary cog in the vast imperial machine, vital for its function, but a cog nonetheless, easily replaced. And if your soul was born into the very bottom of this rigid, unyielding pyramid, you might be one of the millions of indigenous people, your ancestors the original masters of this land, the builders of cities and empires, now dispossessed and forced into a system of grueling tribute labor known as the mita in the mines or the encomienda on the haciendas, with almost no rights, your culture systematically suppressed, your gods declared demons by the priests. Or you are a slave, captured in a distant African village, branded with a hot iron, and shipped across the vast, terrifying Atlantic in the suffocating, disease-ridden hell of a slave ship's hold. Your very humanity is legally denied, your body is considered property, an asset like a horse or a mule, to be bought, sold, and worked to death in the sugar fields of the Caribbean or the plantations of Brazil. This is the caste system, a rigid, suffocating pyramid of power and blood, a labyrinth of dozens of legal and social distinctions, asterisk caste as asterisk, based on minute shades of skin color and the perceived purity of one's lineage. It is the very bedrock of the Spanish Empire, the ideological glue that holds it all together. But this bedrock, once thought as eternal and unshakable as the mountains themselves, is beginning to fracture. Deep, hairline cracks, invisible to most. Cobblestones, the mournful, drawn-out braying of a donkey laden with sacks of maize, a merchant in the street below, his voice a melodic, rapid-fire Spanish, hawking fresh, hot bread, asterisk pan caliente, pan del dia. Asterisk, this is your world. And your place in it, your entire destiny, your potential for wealth or misery, was decided for you the moment you took your first breath. If fortune, and more importantly bloodline, smiled upon you at birth, you are a Creole. You were born in this vast new world, yes, under the brilliant American sun, but your veins run with pure, unadulterated Spanish blood. Your family's name, an echo from Castile or Andalusia, carries weight and commands respect. You own land, perhaps a silver mine high in the barren Andes whose dark veins bleed wealth for the Spanish crown, or a sprawling agricultural estate, a hacienda, that stretches across entire valleys, its boundaries marked by rivers and distant mountain peaks. You have wealth, an education likely acquired at the great universities of Europe like Salamanca, and a burning, deeply personal resentment for the galling, infuriating fact that the most powerful positions, the viceroy, the archbishop, the highest judges, are reserved for others. For the peninsulars, those born on the Iberian Peninsula, in Spain itself, they step off the galleon from Cadiz or Seville with an air of effortless, unearned superiority, a royal appointment from the king tucked in their coat pocket, ready to govern a land and a people they do not understand and often disdain. They see you, the Creole, as provincially tainted, somehow lesser for the crime of being born on the wrong side of the Atlantic, your blood thinned by the tropical air. If you are less fortunate, you are a mestizo, a living, breathing testament to the violent and intimate collision of two worlds, a blend of Spanish and indigenous ancestry. You are the artisan, the skilled carpenter whose hands shape the ornate doors of the new. What if I told you that in the span of a single human lifetime, the world you know was forged in fire, blood, and unimaginable ambition? That entire empires, centuries old, could shatter like glass, while a new kind of power, hungry and relentless, rose to dominate a hemisphere? Tonight, we're not just learning history. We're going to live it. We'll journey back to a time when the map of our world was being violently redrawn, when the very ideas of freedom and nationhood were radical, dangerous dreams. So, get comfortable. Settle in. We're about to open our eyes in 1789, and the world will never be the same again. Your eyes flutter open, but not to the familiar gentle glow of a phone screen. There is only darkness, a thick and heavy primordial blackness that seems to swallow sound and light. The air is a rich, complex cocktail of smells, the acrid, ever-present tang of wood smoke from 1,000 hearths clinging to the damp morning air, the earthy, loamy scent rising from the unpaved ground, and the undeniable sour perfume of humanity packed too closely together, a scent of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and cooking fires.
À distance, rythmique clang cut through the gloom.
Not an alarm, but the deep resonant toll of church bells, a sound that orders time itself, a sacred metronome calling the faithful to matins in a Spanish colonial town lost somewhere in the vast, brooding landscape of the Americas.
The year is 1789.
The blanket you're under is a coarse, scratchy wool, woven from the fleece of hardy local Chuo sheep. It chafes your skin as you push yourself up from a mattress stuffed not with feathers or cotton, but with crackling, dry straw that rustles and sighs with your every move. It smells faintly of the field it was cut from and the mice that have likely nested within it. Listen closely. The world outside your heavy wooden shutters is awakening into a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, the hollow clatter of solid wooden cartwheels on uneven centuries old.